Hey everyone, and welcome to another very special Talking Song episode. Kristen is with us. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
That's super nice. For those of you who don't know Kristen, you've written some amazing comments on the YouTube channel, and that's I read some of them, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's got to be a guest, and I'm so happy you're here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So with that said, yeah, just tell us a little bit about your story. How did you start having trouble sleeping?
So, okay, I'm going to try to condense 15 years of insomnia into a reasonable time period. So here goes. Okay, so basically, I've always had performance anxiety. So I remember back to high school before a big sports event or like the ACT exam, I had trouble sleeping, and mostly in the mornings. I would wake up prematurely and just toss and turn. I felt, butterflies in my stomach, and I was just restless, but I never worried about sleep then. And then in college, I remember not being able to sleep before the MCAT exam. For those listening, the MCAT is the test for pre-med students who want to go to med school. It determines whether or not you get to go. So it's like, oh, no big deal. Your future depends on tomorrow. So I put a lot of pressure on that and all tests. But anyway, so I got zero sleep the night before the MCAT. And I can sort of like remember like channeling my mom being like, you need a good night's rest. Like you have to get a good night's rest. And sorry, mom, if you're listening. And so that, and then also thinking about like remembering that somewhere I heard, if you don't get a certain amount of sleep, it's like the equivalent of being drunk. So I was like, oh, great, I'm going to be drunk taking this test tomorrow. So like I was trying so hard to sleep, just like forcing it, like just like, come on, come on. Why am I not sleeping? I was checking the clock, and that's how I know I got 0 minutes of sleep, because I literally watched like every 5 minutes I could see the time. So so yeah, I again like didn't worry about sleep then. I just thought that was weird, but okay, moving on. So I did fine on the MCAT. I got into med school. Okay, so then my first year of med school, I like routinely could not sleep before exams, and the final exams in the first year were staggered 3 days in a row of tests, and so that meant 3 days in a row of no sleep for me. So that was my big one. So I remember that first night, I was thinking like, if I don't sleep, I'm not going to remember all the stuff I spent so much time cramming into my head. And just my brain won't work. And I got through that first test, but I was just like so amped up, like just so hyper aroused. And on the second day, I was like, oh, okay, I better sleep tonight. Like I better. And so then when that wasn't happening, of course, I was even more hyper aroused. So I started popping Tylenol PMs like every 4 hours. Like the package says like no more than 4 hours, like that's your interval. And I was literally like watching the clock. Is it time for my next dose yet? Because I was like, the next one will work, the next one will work. And it never did. It sort of made me groggy, and it actually made me pee orange. And I was like, I cared so little about that, because I was just, all I cared about was like just getting a little sleep. Like I was like, I don't, whatever's happening in my body, like it's not important right now. Like I need the sleep. So, but it never worked. It just sort of like, just made me a little fuzzy at night. So then I migrated to the couch, and I tried to sleep there because I was just hating my bed at that point.
Sorry, Kristen, but are we still in those like 3 nights now, or is this?
Yes, this is like night 2-ish.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I migrate to the couch, and this is sort of where I feel like the fear shifted from the exams to like the actual fear, like fear of the fear. Like I was like, what is happening to my body? I'm just lying here, and my heart rate is 120, and I was like, my breathing was like like I felt like I was like just the world was closing in, like true panic. And I was like, sort of like borderline crying. I remember having a dry mouth. My hands were shaking. It was just like this like sustained panic attack. And my thoughts at the time were like, is this the beginning of like a psychotic break? And like, do I need to go to the emergency room and get checked out because this feels terrible? Like, what is happening to my body? And I catastrophized. I was like, if I go to the ER and I get checked into a psych ward, like that's going to be like, I might get kicked out of med school because like the med school is going to be like, this person's unstable and like my career will be over. And so I just tried to just like, grit and bear it. And I was bewildered. Your word. I love that word. It's so fitting. So somehow I got through the exams, like day 2 and day 3. And that part is a blur. I feel like I was just like a wreck before the exams, but then during the actual exam, it's like I had this razor sharp focus because that hyper arousal was like at its peak. Like here's the fight, like here's the threat, like it's right here, like focus, And then after the test, like I went home and I slept, but like the sleep like never went back to normal, and neither did I. I was seriously like traumatized by that. So like I called home, talked to my parents, and I was like in tears, and I was like, I can't sleep. I don't know what's wrong with me. And both of my parents have sleeping problems too. And my dad had like this stash of Lunestas, and he brought them to me, and I was like, oh, thank you. And so I was taking those for a while, and like it worked for a decent number of weeks. Like got me through the rest of first year, I felt like. And then, but I remember that I was starting to double the dose. Like I was starting to take 2 pills, and I was like, because I wasn't seeing the same effect as I was in the beginning. And then I was getting a little bit scared, like that I was going to OD on these pills. So anyway, by this time it's second year of med school, and I'm consistently only sleeping like 4 hours a night, like despite setting aside 8 hours to sleep. So I was now in this habit of sleeping on the couch because I was so like just traumatized from my bed. Like I just didn't want to be in my bed anymore. So I was on the couch, and I would fall asleep there. I would wake up like before dawn. So I would fall asleep late, like around 1ish, and then I would wake up by 5 and like be so tired but so wired. I just hated that feeling, and it was dark and quiet and nobody else was awake. Um and yeah, I just remember thinking like I'm spending so much time studying, and I could be studying more, like instead of just like tossing and turning, but like I'm afraid my brain's not going to retain information because I'm not sleeping enough. Like this is really probably damaging. And I was also convinced that my lifespan would be shortened. Like I was aging prematurely. I would look in the mirror, and I've heard you address this in your podcast that like some people believe like their skin is affected, like they look tired, they look older. And I would do that. I would look in the mirror and I would be like, oh my gosh, like it's happening. Like I'm older. I'm so much older than everybody else right now. So anyway, like I'm going to and from class, doing nothing but studying and like worrying. And I just remember having this song in my head by the Ramones that's called I Want to Be Sedated. You know the one? I
Yeah,
want
I
to
know.
be sedated. And that was like my theme song. And we'll talk later about earworms too, because I know another guest who had mentioned having music in his head when he was having bad insomnia. And that was a thing for me too. So maybe we can talk about that. But anywho, so um, anyway, then I went home to my parents for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I thought, oh, for sure, like I'll sleep in my wonderful childhood bed. That's like my safe place. And I didn't. I didn't. And that was actually devastating for me. And I kid you not, like Christmas and Thanksgiving for the next several years were like a little bit dampered. Like I like carried with me these like negative emotions and feelings and memories, all related to sleep and the inability, like, or the struggle. Then, Christmas breaks over. I go back to med school, and it turns out that I have this intro to psychiatry class. So after class, I went up to the instructor and I'm like, hey, so I can't sleep. And I'm just wondering, like, could I like develop dementia or just sort of like go crazy from this because this can't be good? And he's like, no, not confidently, just sort of like, no, but there are some really good drugs to help you. And he's like really excited about that. So I was like, oh, goody, like I'll take anything. So I made an appointment with psychiatry, which I was just so reluctant to do because again, I was like, this could be like a stain on my record. Like, will the medical school find out and like kick me out? And there are so many implications. And it's like, anyway, so terrifying. And oh yeah, and I did see somebody from my class rotating there. And of course, with HIPAA, you can't like disclose that you saw somebody at the psych clinic, but like it was always on my mind that like this person saw me there. Awkward.
Oh,
Okay, so like
you saw the person, but it wasn't like the person seeing you as a resident or something like that.
right, she was just sort of in the clinic rotating, and she was like she was in
She
the
happened to
hall
see you.
like
Yeah,
with
yeah.
other patients. So yeah, that would have been extra awkward if she had
Right.
to like interview me. Yeah, no, it wasn't that, but so yeah, so like I go to this appointment and I describe what was happening, and they basically I said I was just totally wired and like, could this be mania? Because I actually had a family history of bipolar disorder. So I was like, is this it for me? Like, could this be it? Even though I sort of knew it wasn't, because I didn't feel like euphoric, I was just like angry and like just not feeling good to be awake. I wasn't like, yippee, like I want to do stuff and who cares about sleep? No, I cared so much about sleep. So when I asked about, mania and psychosis, I got these concerned looks, and like they said like, I don't think so. But then they were like writing in their notepads, and they like never
Mhm.
told me what they thought was going on. Like the words hyperarousal and insomnia never came up once. And that would have been a game changer, but they just didn't. I don't think they even thought about it. But they gave me benzos, clonazepam, and even said, we can consider SSRIs later if that doesn't, if you want something longer term. Um, but, the focus for them was that the test anxiety and thinking that it was like, adjustment to medical school being the source. And nobody was thinking about like, the sleep anxiety. It was sort of just like, and I thought that was weird because I was like, well, my next set of tests aren't for a while. So like, I don't know if that's why I'm not sleeping now. Like, I don't understand this. But yeah, they didn't either. So anyway, off I went with my benzos. And that honestly, it worked well, like for, on and off usage. Like it sort of knocked me out. Um, and sometimes I had lingering side effects during the day, and actually was sort of drifting off in one of my lectures, and one of my instructors saw me and was like, hey, are you okay? So anyway, though, for the next 10 years, that was like my go-to. So for 10 years, I was taking clonazepam on and off as needed. And it was usually after struggling in bed, and I would get frustrated enough. And, I'd always try to go without the pill. And then I'd be like, oh, but I need it tonight, and then I'd take it, and then I'd guilt myself. And sometimes I would take it prophylactically, especially on Sunday nights. I just always had stress about the coming week, and I almost never slept on Sunday nights without a pill. And then, yeah, just being awake for me was like intolerable at night. It was like an emergency. Like I would panic and wake up my husband from his sleep, partly because like I needed somebody there and needed to talk to somebody, and partly also subconsciously because like I couldn't stand to see somebody else sleeping, I think, honestly, like if I'm being real with myself. So yeah, I guess over those 10 years, I noticed though that there were plenty of times when um, I I didn't really have major life stresses, and my sleep was still messed up. So like just I never understood that. So fast forward to my 30s, and I'm pregnant, and I had my sleep under control with the first pregnancy using Unisom, which is like Benadryl, antihistamine. And I actually started taking that for nausea in the beginning, but it had this nice side effect of drowsiness. So I was like, oh, sweet. Like I'll just keep using that throughout the pregnancy. And then I kept using it postpartum too. And I had a lot of struggles postpartum. The second pregnancy was worse. Like, I was taking a cocktail of pills. Like, I was taking the Unisom plus clonazepam plus propranolol because my hyperarousal was really strong, and I felt like that really helped me with the, the peripheral anxiety symptoms, the shakiness, the jitters, the heart rate. And it's interesting because, I was tracking with, the watch everybody wears. I was tracking heart rate and everything. And I was getting like a low heart rate warning, like overnight, like your heart rate is going too low. But like, I didn't even care. Like, I was like, it's helping me to sleep, right? It kind of was, but kind of wasn't. So anyway, like, taking these pills during pregnancy, it was a horrible, like, I felt so bad all the time and I struggled so much. And it's like, I felt like I was even like, not only was I judging myself, but I sensed that I was being judged when I was getting prenatal care. Like, when I was getting the questions about pills, how much are you taking? Do you need to take it? And can you try to reduce? And I really like it. I spent a lot of time in tears, like reviewing this topic and like trying to read the literature about, exposure, prenatal exposure to clonazepam and whatnot. So I was always like, also like, finagling with the doses of my pills. Like, oh, I took more clonazepam last night, so tonight I'll take a lower dose of that, increase the propranolol, or take more Unisom, whatever. Like, it was always this like calculating. But ultimately, like, I truly believed that I was protecting the baby from, the damage that might happen if I didn't sleep. Like, I was convinced that I would have high cortisol and like the adrenaline that was always going through my body. Like, I was like, that's got to be harmful, right? So like, I really thought I was choosing the lesser of two evils, but it did not feel good. So yeah, so I was waking up prematurely again throughout the pregnancy, like, not related to physical stuff, like peeing and whatnot, just like totally like, this, by itself, just waking. And then that's when I was hearing club music. Okay, so like at work, I was listening to Pandora all day, Tiesto radio. So it was like, like, it gets in your head. But in the mornings when I was hearing it, it was almost like it was louder and it was annoying. And I thought it was the reason I was waking up. And now I recognize that, like, I almost always have a song in my head. It's just, it became super annoying when I was like having insomnia and looking for reasons for why I was having insomnia, because I didn't understand it back then. Earworms, fascinating. Anyway, I digress. So, so I was waking up early and I was like, tired and wired, and I was trying to compensate for the sleep loss at work. I had a pillow and a blanket in my drawer at work. And I would take naps at work. And most of the time people didn't really notice, but there were a couple times when, one of my administrative people would come by and be like, I was looking for you. Your door was closed. Like, are you okay? And I didn't tell them I was napping. I was like embarrassed. And I could have said, oh, I'm pregnant and I'm just so tired. Like, they would have understood, but that was not the excuse. Like, I didn't feel like that was why I was sleeping. Like, I was just like, no, I really, truly just can't sleep. And I didn't want to tell anybody. I did enough like telling my husband, and I felt like he just, like, over time was like he couldn't take anymore. And I get it. But yeah, so anyway, so postpartum, I, just like other people on the podcast, like Stephanie, I saw her show recently, and she couldn't sleep when the baby was asleep. Like, yes, exactly. And I also had a lot of anticipatory anxiety, like, oh, the baby's going to wake up soon anyway, or I have to wake up to pump, like all these reasons to be awake. And I just couldn't sleep. And during this time, I was still using the pill cocktail. And I really hated that, though. I really wanted to stop. And so I thought, if I fix my life anxiety, my sleep will follow, right? Like, that's what I have to do. So I was working on a CBT book, like doing DIY sort of CBT. And it was a little helpful at first with, navigating my recurrent thought of what if I don't sleep tonight? Because then I would balance it out with, well, what's the worst case scenario? What's the most likely scenario? What would you tell a friend? Like the whole CBT list of things to say to yourself. And that helped a little bit, but I felt like it started to be the same thing over and over again. And I plateaued and I was like not moving forward anymore. So I reached out to a CBT therapist and I wanted to really just get more mileage. So that's when we started sleep logging. And we'd spend time focusing on the bad nights, trying to troubleshoot like what went wrong that particular night. Was it the baby? Was it, are you thinking more about work and having to go back to work soon? Is it the lighting? He was like so obsessed with the lighting, like talking about blackout curtains, talking about like if I have to get up with the baby, if it's too bright in my room, I can get these special like sunglasses for like indoor lighting and stuff. And I was like, this sounds crazy, but all right, like let's keep going anyway, because I'll take anything. And so then he was also recommending like relaxation stuff before bed that now I realize is totally sleep ritual. But at the time, again, I was like, oh, these things will work, right? So I was doing progressive muscle relaxation, PMR in bed. It was like prescribed to me, like do this once in the day and once before bed at night. And then I was doing deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. And I was also listening to the Calm app. It was Wonder by Matthew McConaughey. And his voice is lovely, but like over time I grew to hate it. I was like, Matthew McConaughey, shut your face. Like, I don't want to hear anymore. It was driving me nuts because like nothing was working, And so, and during this time, by the way, I'm like weaning off my drugs on my own schedule, like a very rigid, fixed schedule, and like not having any self-kindness. Like I would feel like this is unbearable. I can't sleep and I need something. And I would take a pill and then I would guilt myself about it. And that was really rough, like not having the knowledge I have now, which I learned from you, that like taking a pill is an act of self-love, like that I like really wanted to escape that discomfort, and that's normal. So like that's one way we do it, right? So, but I didn't have that self-kindness. I was just feeling like really guilty every time I did it. Like, oh, it's a step back and why do I do this? And anyway, so at this time I was still having trouble I was having trouble falling asleep. And with that thought, what if I don't sleep tonight? And I would get this adrenaline rush and I knew it was coming. And then once I had that adrenaline rush, I was like, it's over. And I was also waking in the middle of the night when it's still dark, like 3 and 4 o'clock. And I was like, oh no, it's happening again. Like, why am I even awake? And then adrenaline rush and it was over. So on top of that, nursing a baby at night, I would nurse her and go back to my bed and often just not sleep there. And so I'd be, go to work the next day on 2 hours of sleep. And I was so worried about getting into a car accident. I was like, this can't be safe for driving. Like this has to be a risk. Like, am I threatening my life every day by driving? I was worried I wouldn't get through the day at work. I was worried I wouldn't have energy for the kids when I got home. Just like so many things to worry about. And then at work during the day, I would spend time obsessing about what happened the previous night. And then I would worry about what might happen the coming night. So one day after work, after not seeing much progress with the CBT specialist, I just searched on my phone. I went to the podcast app and I just typed in sleep. And that's how I found Martin Reed. And I binged him. I binged all of his episodes. And then when I finished those, I binged them again. And I was like just so relieved to know I wasn't alone and that insomnia wouldn't harm me and there's hope for me. And like, maybe someday I'll be one of these podcast guests. And I was so close to enrolling in his course. But my therapist was offering CBT-I as well. And it was free because, like my insurance paid for therapy. So I was like, all right, we'll do this, therapist, even though like I'm watching you. Like I didn't have full faith. Okay. So, but we embarked and
And by the way, Chris, just for anyone tuning in here, in the story, like, where are we? How long ago was this now?
so now, this
That you
was
found
like
on
over
week.
the summer or like early springs or late spring, early summer ish
So
of
this
this
is
year.
literally like 7 to 8 months ago, something like that.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So I was like, let's do the CBT-I thing. I have to get, kick out the baby from my room. I'm gonna miss her, but I have to have stimulus control and like not have her disruption waking me and like I need to control this environment. So, I moved her to the nursery, gave my husband the monitors. She was 5 months old at the time, and I was like, I did my time. It's your turn, husband. And so as soon as I moved her from the room, my sleep got worse. And my therapist was like, I think it's because you're lonely and you miss her. I was like, I don't know. And later I realized, like, no, it was not loneliness. It was the pressure to sleep. Like, I felt like I have to sleep now. She's not here. I have no excuse. Right. So, so then we started, stimulus control for real, which made things worse. I was too obsessed with doing nothing but sleeping in my bed to the point where I felt like I couldn't even sit on my bed to put socks on. Like, don't do it. That's not sleeping in bed. Um, it went so far as to be like, don't even think about the bed unless you're in it sleeping or thinking about like sleeping in your bed, like trying to thought control, which I didn't realize was like a thing you can't do either until I got into your stuff. So can you imagine like the control, anyway, I also thought that every second I spent in bed, not asleep, had to be canceled out by sleeping, like balancing a math equation. Like it has to be exact. Like, oh my gosh. And then on top of that, like when I was out of bed after the 20 minutes or whatever, I just couldn't find anything to make it okay to be awake at night. And I can remember nights when I was just bouncing out of bed all night and trying things I didn't like, listening to Matthew McConaughey. I tried some yoga stuff. I tried folding laundry. Like these are all things that were recommended to me. What I really wanted to do was watch TV or go on my laptop, but my therapist was so anti-light. He's like, that's going to disrupt your rhythm. It's going to stimulate you. I'm really worried about that. So I just, I didn't do anything. I couldn't find anything else enjoyable. And he was like, just, can you get a magazine? I'm like, where do I even get a magazine? Like, what decade is this? Like, who does that? No offense to anybody who's older out there, but so yeah, that was the stimulus control part. That was just so much of a performance and just too much obsession there. And then for the sleep restriction component, there was too much focus on the time and tracking and logging. And then what drove me nuts in the end was like you're supposed to be estimating like the time you go to bed and estimate like how many times you woke up and how long you were awake, right? To calculate sleep efficiency. But it's such a rough estimate. Like literally sometimes I was like, I don't know if it was an hour or 10 minutes. And then from those numbers, we were calculating a percentage, and that percentage down to the like 5% was determining what would happen the next week. I just thought like this, it can't make sense. So after many, many weeks of this torture, I was dragging myself through the days and I was dreading getting into the night. So feeling desperate again, I went back and looked for more podcasts, and I started listening to you then. I actually had heard your name first when you guested Martin's
Morning
show.
show, yeah.
Yeah. So I knew your name. I just hadn't listened to any of your stuff. And so I tuned in, and it was at first I was like, it was like an episode that was like, a letter or a response to like named people. And I was like, I don't know what they're talking about, but I stuck with it, and I was picking up, the terminology and starting to like really, really dive in. And that's when my enlightenment began. Okay. So I would say the biggest thing I remember being like, an aha for me was like when I came across your explanation of like the brain is keeping me vigilant at night in case I'm attacked by wakefulness. Okay, like that made so much sense. So wakefulness is what I'm afraid of. And so befriending wakefulness would be the key. Like that all made so much sense. And I want to give a shout out to your episodes numbers 341 and 329, because this is where the magic happened, or some magic happened, because there was a lot more I needed to. But yeah, so I was thinking about all this and I'm like, okay, so befriending wakefulness is like, it's like exposure therapy for a phobia of wakefulness. Like that makes so much sense. Whereas with stimulus control, like you're told to run away from the bed. Like that's the opposite. Like that makes absolutely no sense. So like, and as you said, the bed is just like a trigger. It's just a trigger. It's just a reminder of your sleep struggles. It's not like the source. It's no different from like my insomnia sweater that I had. Like I literally bought a sweater, like a nice cozy sweater that I could wear when I was having like really sleepless nights. And that's the same. I get the same feeling when I go near that sweater. Like it's like the same, it's a trigger, like same thing. So anyway, I started questioning everything. And I thought, if I befriend wakefulness, like nothing else really should matter, right? Like they're like sleep hygiene, stimulus control, like I'm going to start like ditching that stuff because it's become so much difficulty, like just a struggle for me. So, and I thought nothing to lose, right? Like my sleep is total crap. Like I might as well experiment. And around this time, I listened to your the Fearless Method episode number 317, for anybody taking notes out there. And also your episode about abandoning, ideal conditions for sleep. Oh my gosh, that was so helpful. So I started small. Okay. I started with like, abandoning the idea that I needed to have the lights out. Okay. So I slept with the lights on. Oh, that was fine. Okay. And eat chocolate before bed, drink wine before bed, all that, sleep hygiene stuff. And I was still a little too chicken to like watch TV in bed. But I did incorporate screens. I went on my laptop and I did some online shopping for things that needed to be purchased. And that was the first night I had ever had that was a sleepless night and a somewhat positive experience. And so I actually held on to those memories. And during the day for the next couple of weeks, I would like reflect back on that and visualize myself being calm and even happy at night. And that was so helpful. So then your insight number 319, that is the one that granted permission to watch Netflix in bed. When I first heard that, I was like, oh, blasphemy. Like that is so anti-stimulus control. Like what's my therapist going to say? He's going to explode. So I told him about this and he's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Oh, no, 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 no. And I was like, well, we'll see about that. That sounds good to me. So like in the end, I did a bunch of stuff that was against his advice, and we ended up parting ways as a result. So I always laugh when you have that disclaimer, like, my stuff is, it's not meant to be taken as advice over your professionals. And I'm like, oh, but it should be. Like, it's so much better than what I've heard. So yeah. So anyway, so when I watched Netflix in bed, that was absolutely amazing for me. And I really turned the corner then. And I will say though that it did have to be an interesting show, like something that kept my attention, because otherwise I was effectively just trying to sleep. Like I had to forget that. So I was watching things that would be totally like not recommended for like helping you fall asleep by anybody else. But for me, it was like, that's what I needed. I needed to like really want to be awake, and that's when I could sleep.
Like, Keen, do you remember some of the shows you watched?
Oh gosh, it was like Catfish, MTV's Catfish.
I don't know that one actually. Yeah.
Like reality stuff. The other one
Okay.
was Friend Zone. Yeah, so it had to be like something juicy like that. Yeah, if I put on just like a baking show or something, I realized like I wasn't that into it, and I would just think about the fact that I was awake and it wasn't enjoyable. And I was getting myself into a comfy position in my bed, like sort of like, like this, like if I fall asleep, cool. You're like, I won't even know, right? I don't have to like go and move somewhere to sleep. Like it'll just happen. But if I'm awake, that's cool too. Like I'm just watching my show. Cool. So that's how that went down. And I was then like, I'm going to drop this charade of like pretending that I like to get up and read a book and do this like coloring and like crossword puzzles. Like not for me. Like I know people like that. That's not me. So yeah. So then I guess moving into recovery phase, I was in the pendulum, your term, pendulum mode, where I would sleep one night and not sleep the next night. But I was no longer upset about not sleeping those nights. And as you've taught me, that's like your signal for success there. That's like, it doesn't matter how many hours you're getting. It's like, if you're not struggling, that is success. And so, and I kept thinking like each sleepless night now is just a chance for more exposure therapy. And that's what leads to the healing, right? Like my brain needs that exposure. And I felt the hyperarousal just melt away. And in your roadmap episode, you called it the reward when the hyperarousal fades and you feel this fatigue. Oh my God. I was at work and I was like, I need like a shot of meth like they used to do in the 50s. Like I'm like a puddle on the floor. I was drinking like coffee. And that helped. But yeah, like, no, I actually loved that feeling because it was foreign to me. Like I was like, I don't remember feeling this way. Like I'm so relaxed. This is probably how my husband feels like on a regular day. He's like such a big coffee drinker. I was like, I love this. Like I'm happy to have this pendulum. That's fine. And then I heard you describe this in your talks. And I was like, this is totally normal. Awesome. Keep going. Like just keep going forward. So, yeah. So then there was some sleep disruption. I'm not even going to say speed bump. They were disruptions. My dear baby, she was 8 months old at the time. She got COVID. And we tracked it to our nanny, and it was horrifying. I was like, oh my gosh, my little baby. She had a very high fever. She was very sick. And I was so worried. And we found out during the day that she had it, but like up into the night, I was still like, still like not fully processing that she had COVID. And, you know, I was awake all night worried about her. And, I didn't at all worry about my sleep. I was like, of course I didn't sleep. Of course. Because as you've taught me, like having a great night's sleep after something like that may be a little weird, a little sociopathic. So, and I will say now that, and my husband points this out, like maybe I care too little about sleep now. Like maybe I've gone too far in the other direction because I sort of stay up late. Like I really don't care about sleep. And I'm like watching my shows and I'm like, well, I don't really want to go to bed. Like I'm really enjoying my show. And I usually just pass out on the couch. Sometimes I'll go upstairs when, you know, he goes up and I'm like really about to fall asleep. I'm like, all right, fine. I'll go into my bed. But there was a night when it was like 7 p.m. on Saturday. And on the weekends, you know, with kids and stuff, like you're just exhausted. And like 7 p.m. rolls around. You're like, oh, is that it? It's only like, we still have so many hours left. Our kids do not go down at 7. They're owls. And so he's like, you want to pop a no-dose with me? It's a caffeine pill. I'm like, oh gosh, no. But in the end, I did it at 7 p.m. It felt great, but we were awake until 4 a.m. and I didn't care. It felt like college again. Like it was a good night. We just watched shows and like just had a good time. So yeah. And like during the day, I just have so much energy now that I'm not like wondering and pondering and obsessing about the night. Like what happened? Where did I go wrong? What's wrong with me? That's all gone. I have energy for other things now. So even if I don't sleep more than a couple hours one night for whatever reason, I still have the energy.
It's amazing. I'm so happy. I'm so happy it is. This is like, as you can tell, Kristen, I didn't like interrupt you a single time. I don't know. Did you prepare to tell this story? Like, did you know how to tell it?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, part of my type A-ness is like I will come prepared. Like in your email to me, you're like, no preparation needed. Like, it's just a, discussion conversation. I was like, oh, I'm going to prepare. like I like went through my story. I was like, I want it to like flow. I want to like make sure I mention what I think is important. Like, oh yeah, I did that.
I could tell. I know. I think it was really nice. I think you mentioned some episodes, the numbers and everything, and I think it was super helpful to the community who wants to to focus in on some maybe key episodes there. And I want to ask you about a few things. One was the cocktail that you had during their second pregnancy. Like, what happened to that?
It's gone.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I haven't touched it.
It's amazing.
I had maybe, and I would say like 3 months ago, I think there were 2 nights in a 1 month period when I took a little something. It was more like curiosity than anything. Like, I didn't run to it in a panic and say like, okay, I need this now. It was more like I'm just wondering like what happens here. And I will say that I totally believe in delegation as you describe it, like, because I remember distinctively noticing that there were times when I would take the pills and I'd go back to bed and fall asleep like immediately, like way before the pills could have possibly taken effect. And I remember thinking that was so weird, but I was like, whatever works, honestly, I'll take it.
100%. And this is just for people out there. I was so curious to hear it in your words. How would you describe delegation to somebody who's listening now?
I would say, I mean, it's essentially how you describe it, that like you are handing over the responsibility of sleep to something else. So whether that be meditation, listening to some music, taking a pill, whatever it is, you're like, this thing will take care of it. I don't have to worry anymore. It's done. And then you stop thinking about it.
Exactly. The absence of like, you're not trying anymore, and then it happens, and it can be so confusing before you see that, because like there's two things happening. You take a pill, for example, and then you fall asleep, and then of course it must be the pill, but in reality it's like it's so much more, as you said, I don't have to do anything to sleep. It's taking care of me. That act of delegation is really helpful. I'm just mentioning for people out there that are hearing this. And again, like, just pointing out what you said, I'm so happy to, whenever somebody says, not necessarily like I sleep this much every night or like something like that. That's nice. That's super nice to hear too. But when someone says, if I don't sleep, that doesn't frighten me anymore. I'm not scared about it anymore. That to me is like the big one, which means like, okay, this person is on a nice path now, right?
Yeah. I will say the one thing I'm still weird about though is looking at the time at night. Like, I just like not knowing what time it is. But my husband pointed out, he's like, I thought you were over this insomnia stuff. Like, why are you still like avoiding looking at the time and like putting tape on your phone? Like, he's like, do you ever think about that? I'm like, I just like not looking at the time. So lately I've been like just looking at the time, and sometimes it still a little bothers me because my brain will always calculate like how much time is left, but it's not a major problem, just like a minor annoyance sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I understand completely. Like your husband has a point, and you see that too, which is like whenever we're doing anything to sort of preserve and protect sleep, we have a little bit of like maybe a little fear left, a little residual fear. But on the same side, like personally, I don't think I ever had insomnia, or I can say I never had insomnia. I never in my life had insomnia. But I do that. Like when I'm awake at night and I know like, I think it's probably like really late and I haven't fallen asleep and I feel like I'm nervous for some reason, I go upstairs and I kind of like without looking and go like this to my like wall clock and turn it upside down.
Yeah.
And that's just what I do. And
Yeah.
I don't think it's that strange,
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you said that. Yeah.
So again, like what you can decide to like look at the time, just because like that's kind of more exposure to whatever you're scared of, or you don't. Like it really probably doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And I think maybe the only other thing to add here is like, I feel your whole story, like maybe it was like very maybe it was thanks to your preparation, maybe not, but it really built to this like this sort of, how should I put it? The struggle sort of in a way, it was really intense. Then you started taking you got on the clonazepam, and then it was kind of maybe more in the background, but then it started like you got pregnant first time, pregnant second time, and then like the kind of climactic moment of the story was actually when you went on CBT or CBT-I.
Yes.
That's sort of when it became like really full blown, like, craziness, if you will, which is so ironic and also so sad in a way, because so many people, find that, okay, CBT-I is the gold standard. I'm going to do this. I'm motivated. And then it becomes like a disaster instead. And it's so demoralizing when you're told that this is the best thing out there. So yeah, I just, pointing that out.
Absolutely. And, I had in mind, because of Martin's course being 8 weeks, I thought like, okay, roughly 8 weeks is like a benchmark. Like I'll keep that in mind. Like, maybe I'll see only a little progress, but there should be some by then. But no, I was still like in the pits at that time at 8 weeks. There were
Yeah.
many, many weeks after that too that were bad. And yeah, I blew way past that benchmark, and then some others. And so the time is just, I mean, I remember telling myself like this, as you and other people on your show have said, that, it took so many years for these thought patterns to like be solidified. It's going to take a while to chip away at those. They don't just dissolve. It's a long process.
It's a long process, but yeah, but again, where you are now, I think it just makes me so glad. It just makes me so glad to hear your story, Kristen. And I'll just say actually one last thing, which will be where I've started to end all the episodes with this question, which is like if you could maybe going back even to those 3 nights back in med school, if you could tell yourself something that now back then, what would you tell yourself?
Oh gosh, I would just, in that time, I would educate myself. Like, this is like exactly the start of insomnia. Like, you are having a hard time sleeping and you're noticing that, and it's becoming a really stressful thing, and it's causing hyper arousal. That's what all your physical symptoms are. This is not psychosis, not mania. The brain is just making this association now between being awake and danger. Like, this is not your fault. Your brain is just doing that. It's trying to do its job. It's just has the wrong target. And so all these things that are happening are just a part of that. And I feel like if I had understood it then, it would have been quashed. I don't think I would have gone into this like long-term insomnia struggle, and taking pills and everything. But if I had gone that far, and if I had been able to talk to myself, like also in the CBT-I phase, when I was like, this is the worst, like I kind of would rather just be dead sometimes. Like, this is so bad. I would have said like, you're so strong. Like, you are surviving intense psychological torture. It really is. But it's temporary. And when it's over, you will have leveled up in life. Like, I now see so much that I didn't before. I now have this internal dialogue with myself that I never had before. I see my thoughts now. I can describe my thoughts, understand my emotions. That was never a thing for me before your podcasts. Yeah.
That's amazing, and that's sort of when you started going that direction. I wanted to actually follow up with a question on that, and I will here. Maybe if you can even expand on that, like how oftentimes the struggle with insomnia and sort of leaving that struggle, it leads you to a place where you can it can be helpful in other areas of life. Can you speak to that?
Yes, I actually did have a little bit of a moment using the principles I've picked up from you. And I don't remember who originally said, don't fear the fear, but that was also helpful for me. I have performance anxiety with everything, like not just exams, but like if I have to like speak in front of a group, I get really nervous. And so I had a meeting at work, and I normally would just sit there quietly and only speak when spoken to. But this time I was sort of like, okay, like I feel the adrenaline, that's normal. My brain perceives a threat. I I get it. I'm noticing. Cool. Um, and then I was sort of like, all right, I'm ready for the adrenaline rush. Like I'm expecting it. I know it's coming. So bring it. And it actually never came. And this is like right before I wanted to say something. And usually I would get an adrenaline rush that would like inhibit me. I would just be like, never mind, I'm not talking. But I was able to just freely speak at this meeting in front of people and like didn't have those feelings of impairment from the adrenaline. I don't think it's always going to go that smoothly yet. Like I have work to do, but yeah, I never would have thought I could do that.
That's amazing. It's amazing to hear. And as you said, like, will it always go smoothly? And then we'll kind of like, will everything in my life change and become what it's so easy now? Of course not. But I think when we see that, when we see how things are connected, when we understand what's happening inside us, like, everything does become easier and easier. I truly believe that. So yeah,
Yes.
so happy to hear this, Kristen. It's been an amazing story, and this has brought so much value to the community. So so thankful for you coming on.
My pleasure.
You take care now, and be in touch. Okay.
Thank you.